Greetings, friends. Sooner or later, I have to tackle the topic of estimation. I actually really enjoy the topic, and I have some pretty concrete thoughts on it at this point. When I teach story point estimation to teams, here's how I describe it. Tell me how long it would take you to walk to the elevator. Most people can give me an estimate that's like 10 seconds or 30 seconds. And then I say, well, how likely are you to be off and by how much? And people will say, well, I might be off by 10 seconds. Okay, that's pretty reasonable. 30-second walk, you're off by 10 seconds. That's a third. Then I say, how long would it take you to walk to New York City? Now, of course, the answer is very wildly. Nobody really knows for sure how long it'll take to walk to New York City. I say, so they'll come up with everything from 2 weeks to 3 months. And then I say, how likely are you to be wrong and by how much? And here people are likely to say by 100% or more. I said, well, how come you can be so sure? 30% swing when it comes to walking to the elevators, but you're so unsure when it comes to walking to New York. And the answer is always the same. It's always because New York is really far and we've never done it before. Now, the fact that it's very far, not only does that mean we don't even know what the actual distance is. We don't know where, like we have a concept of how far it is, but we're not exactly sure how many miles or kilometers it might be. But also because it's far and it's going to take longer, there's so much more randomness and chaos involved in creating an estimate. Anything could happen. You could blow a tire if you're driving. You could blow a shoe if you're walking. Your knees could gas out. You could roll your ankle. What if it rains? What if it snows? What if your map blows away? How often are you going to stop to eat, to go to the washroom? Sightseeing. When something's really far away, really complex, and you've never done it before, it's much, much harder to produce accurate estimates. I read a statistic somewhere that when people estimate, they're up to 400% off, 400% too big or 400% too small, meaning that there's a sway of about 1,600%. So another way of saying that is if I tell you something's going to take an hour, statistically, it is as likely to take 15 minutes as it is to take 4 hours if it's something I've never done before. Now look, your auto mechanic is really good at estimating and fixing prices because most everything they do has been done before. And statistics and metrics have been accumulated in a database that they can use to predict the size of future work, even if they're not exactly sure of what they're facing when they get the car up on the lift. Rusty bolts makes it take a little longer, but that's all factored into the industry average. That's wonderful. But that's because they've done it thousands of times. And everyone who does it anywhere in the country, maybe anywhere in the world, does it roughly the same way and will come up with roughly the same numbers averaged over time. Furthermore, a lot of service operations have a standard procedure issued by the manufacturer. So there is some consistency in how the thing is done. But when you innovate, the very nature of innovation is that you've never done it before. In fact, it has never been done before, quite possibly. And we're not certain how long it will take. Now, if you sit there and stare at the problem long enough, you could say, well, it's really similar to doing something like this. But that's assuming the solution approach you have in mind actually works out. It might not. It might fail. In which case, you got to throw everything away and start over, including the estimates that you spent so long trying to come up with. So we could say walking to New York, well, let's see. It's X miles and I can do X miles per hour walking. So I'm assuming it will take 1 divided by the other, 42 days. Then you start thinking, well, what's the probability that I'll blow my ankle out? What's the probability that I'll wear through a pair of shoes? How many days will it likely be too cold or too rainy to continue walking? Let's say there's some math around that, and there might be. Let's say there's some stats around that. Can you be certain? Because if you can be certain, you should be in the weather business. Because in the weather business, they have an awfully hard time being accurate about weather that's about to happen even 2 hours from now, because sometimes weather is so chaotic that it can't be accurately predicted. They literally can't tell which way the winds are going to move things. So if I force you to be accurate in your estimates, I'm basically forcing you to do one of two things. Either you will buffer your estimate, probably by, when people buffer estimates these days, it's not by a factor of 10%, it's by 50 or more, so that you have enough buffer in there so that when the unpredictable thing happens, you're covered. Or, and I worked for a place for several years that did fixed priced estimation, so I know this to be true, that you'll fix a price. You say, this will take me 16 hours. And if you come up on the 16 hours and you're not done, what are you going to do? You're going to start trading scope. You're going to say, because I did you the favor of fixing this estimate, I reserve the right, if anything changes. So once again, once chaos and randomness enters the equation, if anything changes, I get to change the amount of scope I deliver in that 16 hours. So all I'm guaranteeing you is that at the end of 16 hours, something will be done. Now, in effect, that's the kind of estimation that I do like to see in an Agile workspace because it encourages constant dialogue between the product owner and the team. And it allows us to say things like, well, I assumed that if I had X, I could deliver Y, but I didn't get X. So now we have to redefine Y. I think those are good and healthy conversations to have. And keep in mind, after you've done X and Y a certain number of times, you can plan for blockers and obstacles ahead of time that increase the certainty that you will deliver Y. Let's face it, once you've walked to New York once, your estimates will improve by a noticeable factor. The next time you go and estimate, you now have a baseline to work from. I think that's the best way to generate good information about estimates. Otherwise, if you're estimating something that has a high degree of randomness or chaos behind it or unpredictability, you've never done it before. You haven't, and it's not even that similar to anything that you have done before. If you're going to estimate badly, and you will, statistically 400% in either direction, if you're going to estimate that badly, you might as well estimate quickly. Why? So that you can minimize the impact of the estimation process, get down to the business of experiencing and doing so that you can refine estimates over time. Because one argument that people of concrete estimates have is that a business sees project work as an investment, and as such, they have a right to know how their investment is doing. They have a right to know how much they should expect for how much of an investment. And that is absolutely true. But if you want to innovate, don't you have to be willing to throw some of that investment away? Isn't there a certain amount of risk involved in any investment? Now, I don't think anyone should suggest that we never come up with how much for how much type conversations, but I think the best way to arrive at how much stuff you get for how much time or money investment is something that you learn as a team, because the variability in an estimate comes from the reality on the ground with your people, in your environment, with your specific indigenous challenges. Those are the things that will make estimates more accurate, not more time sitting, staring, and applying science to the problem. To put a long story short, I truly believe that your estimates become naturally more accurate when you remove the pressure to get them accurate the first time out, but instead commit to learning and improving through actual trial and proper measurement. Then you can start to accumulate data about how long it takes your team to do things. And so a fledgling or new Agile team, one of the things I don't stress is immediate accuracy in estimates. And that allows us to be free to come up with estimates more quickly and get down to the business of delivering value. Look, the reality is this: you weren't born walking great. You had to stumble, fall, learn, and perfect. And so it is with estimation. Something to think about, guys. You know where to find me, badassagile.com, or on Twitter @badass_agile, and on Instagram @badassagile. I'll see you next time, guys. Thanks for tuning in.